This emergency meeting is obviously very urgent. I think everyone who came, everyone who stopped everything and booked their trip to get here understands how serious this issue is today. And I was asked to address the issue of replacement theology. It might be a little strange coming from an Orthodox Jewish rabbi in the room to be telling you about Christian theology, but I was asked to address it from the perspective of what's actually written in the Bible about it. And a lot of people don't realize this. And I didn't realize it until recently. I was reading, sometimes you're reading a passage in the Bible that you've read 1,000 times, and God opens it up for you, and you see something you've never seen before. Well, this happened to me a few years ago. And what I'd like to share with you, I'm going to tell you the punchline at the outset. Replacement theology. And there's a lot of different flavors of replacement theology. But let's keep it basic. The idea that the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, lost the promises, lost their covenant. That is the most repeated promise, the most repeated prophecy in the Bible by far, but that somehow God revoked that, and that the lengthy exile, what Augustine assumed would be an eternal exile. He likened us to Cain, who for the sin of killing his brother were doomed to wander for eternity. That's more or less replacement theology, that the Jewish people have lost their covenant. What I would submit to you is that in the Bible itself, quite directly, it prophesies that this phenomenon will occur. That people who know the Bible and believe in the Bible will deny that the nation of Israel has a covenant, will claim that they lost it, and will claim that their exile is eternal. And I'd like to show that to you. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, of course, is a series of speeches that Moses gives in the last 5 weeks of his life. And at the very end of the book, in chapters 28, 29, and 30, in that speech, Moses gives the first comprehensive eschatological prophecy in the Bible, where he really talks about what's going to happen in the distant future. And in Deuteronomy 28, he famously lays out all of these curses that will befall the nation of Israel. And I want to bring up one of them now without explaining it, because I will explain it at the end, but I want to mention it here. Where in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 35, verse 35, one of the punishments in all of these curses, it talks about the nation of Israel, the Jewish people will go into exile. And it says in verse 33 and 34, it says that God will lead you and your king out into foreign lands. You're basically going to lose your land. You're going to go into exile. And let's remember that in the ancient world, exile meant your nation was over. And then in verse 35 is a very strange curse. It says in Hebrew, V'hayita l'shama l'mashal v'lishnina b'chol ha'amim asher yenaikcha Adonai shama. And you will be an astonishment, a mashal, which means a proverb or a parable, and a shnina, which means something, a byword, in all of the lands where God will send you. So somehow this is tied to being in exile, that we're going to become a parable, a mashal. And the commentaries are a little bit confused, and they come up with all kinds of explanations. What does it mean to be a parable? What kind of curse is that? You will be a parable. I'll get to that soon. And then we fast forward after the curses in chapter 29. It speaks about that lengthy exile. And at the end of Deuteronomy chapter 29, there's a fascinating passage. And it speaks about the desolation of the land that goes on for a very long time. It refers to Hador Ha'acharon, which literally means the last era or the last generation, always translated in Christian Bibles as a later generation. But Acharon, anyone who knows Hebrew knows that the word Acharon has only one meaning. It means last. So at some distant point in the future, listen to what it says. The whole land is brimstone, salt, and burning. It's not sown, nor does it bear, nor does any grass grow there. I'm picking that up in Deuteronomy 29, verse 23. It's like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Adman Savoyim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and his wrath. And so it's mentioning the land is desolate. And we know that many travelers passed through this land throughout the 2,000 years of exile, and they found a desolate land. So this says that in the future, the nation of Israel will be in exile, because we were exiled in the previous chapter. And it's going to go on for a very long time, and people will come. And it says, and all the nations will say, why has the Lord done so to this land? What does all this great anger mean? And people will say, so why is the land desolate? The nation of Israel is in exile. It's going on for a long time. Why'd God do this? And people will say, because they have forsaken the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. And they went and served other gods and worshiped them. Then the anger of God was aroused against this land to bring on it every curse that is written in this book. And the Lord uprooted them from their land in anger, in wrath, and in great indignation, and cast them into another land to this day, meaning forever. I want to point something out. It says here that the people saying this know what's in the Bible. These are people who know the Bible, because they even say the Lord will bring upon them every curse that's written in this book. So the Bible is prophesying that there will be people in the future who will come from other lands. They'll contemplate the fact that the nation of Israel is in exile and the land is desolate, and they'll wonder about it theologically. Why did God do this? And they'll come up with a great answer. God did this because the covenant has ended, because the nation of Israel has turned their back, and therefore they are in exile for eternity. It is quite literally a prediction of the entire logic of replacement theology right there in Deuteronomy 29. But there is one more verse in the chapter. And that verse says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may do all the words of his law. In other words, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. This is what people will think. And then the very next chapter, the beginning of Deuteronomy 30, the very next verses, talk about the return. Even if we are scattered to the ends of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you back to the land of your forefathers and make you more numerous and more prosperous than your ancestors in the land. That's what comes next. Thank you. We're applauding the ingathering. That's wonderful. But listen to what this is astonishing. The proponents of replacement theology do not realize that they are unwittingly fulfilling a prophecy in the book of Deuteronomy that says that they will make exactly that mistake. God says in those curses in Deuteronomy 28 that even though I send you into exile, the covenant is not broken. So when Christian theologians throughout the centuries looked at the seemingly eternal exile of the Jewish people and came to the conclusion that it must be because they lost their covenant, they were literally fulfilling this prophecy in Deuteronomy 29. I don't know if they ever knew the irony of that. Now, I pointed out this strange curse of being a mashal, being a parable, and that the commentators going back 1,000 years, Jewish commentators didn't really know what to do with it. They said, well, it means that people are going to talk about suffering, and when they talk about suffering, they're going to talk about the Jews as a paradigm of suffering, and that's like a parable for suffering. And I'm like, why is that really a punishment to me? So I think that there's a much simpler explanation, especially because the verse says that you'll become a parable in the lands that you are in exile. What does being a parable and being in exile have to do with each other? Well, it's very simple. There are many people today who call themselves Christian, who say very confidently that the Jewish people today, we're not the chosen people anymore. That all those stories in the Bible, all those prophecies in the Bible, all of those promises in the Bible about the nation of Israel returning to the land, that's not meant to be taken literally anymore. Well, folks, what do you call a story that is not meant literally? A parable. When people deny the Jewish identity of Jews today, when people say, as I've heard Christians say, that the Jews of today have nothing to do with the Jews of the Bible, they're taking Jewish history and Jewish identity and turning it into a parable. And that's a horrible curse. God says when you go into exile, you're going to be there for so long. It's going to be such a dark exile that your entire identity and history will be denied. People will look at the Jews as a parable, that you're not even real. That's what we're up against, folks. That's all the time I had. I've probably gone over. There's no clock in the back of the room, so I can be forgiven. But I also haven't heard Nick's bell ring, so I know Nick has a little bell to tell us we're out of time. But I just want to focus in on this and make us realize that we are living in a biblical moment. We're living in a moment when, honestly, a Christian who lived 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, could be forgiven if they thought that the people of Israel will be in exile forever, because it sure looked that way. And I think we're all astonished at the stubbornness of Jews throughout those dark centuries, saying, nope, we're going to go back. We don't know when, but it'll happen eventually. We have it easy now. And the reason that now in social media and on podcasts, they are denying that the Jews are the Jews, and you have this, we saw Tucker Carlson do it. They should take a DNA test, right? They're denying that we're the Jews. You know why? Because they're stuck. Because if they accept that the Jews of today are the Jews, they have to face the fact that the most impossible, most repeated prophecy in the Bible, the return of the nation of Israel to the land, has actually happened. So how do you call yourself a Christian who believes in the Bible, but still hate Israel if the Jews have come back? Aha, we have a workaround. The Jews aren't really the Jews. And then they can still hate Israel because they're denying that the redemption, that the ingathering of the people of Israel has actually happened. They've erased Jewish identity and erased Jewish history. They've turned us into a parable. That's what we're fighting, folks. God bless you.